Stephen's apartment was merely an extension of his office. The quiet loneliness that welcomed him through the door was the same quiet that greeted him every morning when he arrived at work. The monotonous motions of prepping dinner and eating dinner were done with the same enthusiasm as clicking away at his keyboard in the office. Sitting in front of the television and binging another shallow comedy that a friend recommended was just as boring as staring at his spreadsheets all day. His two lives, the work life and his home life, melded into one bland experience. As strong as the television's hold had on him, pulling him into a false sense of entertainment, he remembered some work that needed to be done remotely from his laptop. Stephen grabbed his computer and retreated to his bedroom. He would be working for at least an hour before finally cutting off from work. Well, cutting off his computer from work, his mind would still be tethered with his office work no matter where he was or what he was doing. When he finished with his tasks, he would pass out in the bed where he worked. He thought there should be more for him to do after his work, something worth doing, but there wasn't. Emails and spreadsheets filled his vision. The clicking of the keyboard and mouse were the only sounds in the small apartment. The long minutes dragged on. The changing lights on the computer screen as he robotically switched from one program to the next held him even further into his work trance. There were only a couple things that needed to be done before going into work the next morning. But Stephen couldn't do it. He slammed his laptop shut and rubbed his weary eyes. What he felt wasn't tiredness. It was an exhaustion that had been seeping into his life for months, maybe years. The mundanity of life had wound him in a cycle that consisted of only work and sleep. He wondered if one day the job he had worked his entire career for would provide him with enough satisfaction. Stephen opened his eyes and rested his head against the headboard to his bed. Across the room, beside a small TV, was a tall, filled bookshelf that had been collecting dust. It had been a long time since he opened one of those books, but he remembered the excitement at pouring through their contents years ago. One of Stephen's favorites, one he had read a few times in high school and college, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, hadn't been opened in years. But looking on its faded pages and worn spine filled him with nostalgia. Beside this one were others: Band of Brothers, The Mighty Eighth, The Battle of the Bulge. They all brought back memories of reading those books, and he could not forget watching Saving Private Ryan or playing Call of Duty. Call of Duty, the very first one. Just the thought of the name sent him back in time. He could hear the sounds of tanks approaching while he hid in a foxhole. He recalled the loss he felt when one of his comrades, after several missions, fell in battle. The intense fighting of some of those battles rattled his bones, as if he were actually there on the battlefield, fighting for country, fighting for his life. Stephen smiled at these thoughts. He still played the newer Call of Duties, well, most of them. But after a couple days spent in these newer games, the magic he had felt when playing the Call of Duties of old, the real Call of Duties, never came. Companies mostly cared about making a quick buck now, rather than really investing into the quality of the game. He knew some of it was due to nostalgia. When he was a kid and into his teens, he spent sleepless nights playing match after match with his buddies, his best friends at the time. a time when playing over the internet, using Ventrilo to talk, rather than side by side on the couch, seemed so foreign, so exciting. Stephen laughed at that thought. What he wouldn't give now to have a game night with his friends, all hanging out in the same place, playing from the same location those old games that had brought them so much enjoyment. Nostalgia quickly faded as sadness filled his heart. Most of those friends he hadn't spoken with in years. The few he did lived states away, their lives completely separated from his. Some even had kids. And where was he? Stephen shook his head. No, there's gotta be something to take my mind off this. Something new, something different, yet familiar. He couldn't go back to playing the old Call of Duty games. It wasn't the same without his friends. Besides, most servers were totally dead, others filled with bots, making the golden days of multiplayer officially a thing of the past. There's gotta be some World War II game out there. Something to distract me and something that's halfway decent. Stephen got on his phone and did a quick Google search. Realistic World War II video games. The first link that popped up brought him to the Steam store page to a collection of recommended World War II games. He recognized most of them and skipped past the Call of Duties, past the Battlefields, past the World of Tanks, past the... Wait, what's this? Stephen clicked a game he hadn't heard of before, something different from the typical AAA annual release. Hell Let Loose. Stephen read the description. Join the ever-expanding experience of Hell Let Loose, a hardcore World War II first-person shooter with epic battles of 100 players with infantry, tanks, artillery, a dynamically shifting front line, and a unique resource-based RTS-inspired metagame. Stephen blinked at his phone screen and read the description again. Hardcore World War II? Epic battles? Dynamically shifting front line? Stephen quickly searched for some videos of the game on his phone. What he saw immediately drew him closer to buying this experience. The first video he watched reverberated the sound of tanks that sounded so much like the sounds of old when he played so long ago. The intense fighting he watched seemed like something ripped from a World War II book, rather than a cookie-cutter video game. Rather than nostalgia bringing a sense of joy to him, these images of Hell Let Loose practically handed him the opportunity to make nostalgia reality once again. Pushing aside thoughts of the dozen other games he had tried to fill that nostalgic void, Stephen stood from his bed and started for the other room that held his PC. Disregarding the noises that filled him, telling him he was just going to waste precious time, he turned his PC on and went straight to the Steam store. His eyes glued to the screen. He clicked the purchase button, quickly buying the game without regard for the price. A message popped up, asking him if he wanted to download the game. Stephen clicked yes, opening the way to Hell Let Loose.